For the One, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of Guidance. As we do, putting a parenthesis in the day, that being our few breaths together this evening. And inside of this little parenthesis, we have nothing to do but be here. Whatever is pressing, whatever's in your face, you've probably already had all of the useful thoughts you're going to have about it. So just give it a rest. Put the lid on, put it on the shelf, and come back to it when you actually need to think about it and can think about it productively. And especially when your nervous system is not being jerked around by it. So bringing attention to the raw physical sensation of the body breathing, and just being with that for a few breaths. For some people, this can be very, as we say, regulating, calming, clearing. And if you're someone, and many of us are, who is accustomed to chronic high levels of activation or even hypervigilance, it can actually be anxiety provoking for things to get quiet inside. And so these two different modes of living require different things. So self-knowledge is one of the foundations of any spiritual path. And the onus is upon us to understand which tools work and which ones don't. And it's not everyone's skillful means. The Buddhist term is upaya. It's not everyone's upaya to simply sit and become empty. That works really well for some people and it works really poorly for others. And some people need a little movement or a little sound. Sound is very powerful. It acts directly upon the nervous system as well as upon the subtle mental structures. And the wonderful thing about practices with sound is that they pretty much always work. When sound is combined with movement, it's much more powerful. So that's why we often start with a bit of zikr. One of the reasons. And so let's do a little now. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومنه لا إله إلا لا إله إلا لا إله لا إله لا إله إلا لا as we sometimes do. Thinking La ilaha on the out breath. On the in breath, thinking nothing. And with the footnote that this particular practice is only for retreat. And on some next breath, think La ilaha on the out breath and illallahu on the in breath. And then thinking Hu on the in breath and the out breath. And keep that going. The words of Hazrat Inayat Khan. Guarding the breath. The watching over the breath is important both in meditation and out of it. By guarding the breath, one learns to control the ego, and from a practical view, one develops efficiency in action. For this purpose, there are many esoteric exercises which are given the disciple by the teacher at various stages of the student's development, also according to the student's particular need. In meditation, one should observe the rhythm of the breath. I'm going to come back to that. One should observe the rhythm of the breath until one is able to get the mind quiet. If the mind cannot be quieted, one may just watch the rhythm of the breath continually. Yet one may also purify the breath as by darud. After a while, there may be a tendency for the breath to become more and more refined. Then one will find that it is difficult to watch, and indeed there is no need to observe the breath when one enters the real silence. As one enters the real silence, one begins to receive the energy of space, which is the energy of life. Nevertheless, the student should pay no attention to it. Sometimes one will become sensitive to light, and after a while, this light may increase more and more until one's whole inner being may become radiant with light. Nevertheless, one should pay no attention to it. The heart may pound, the heart may beat, the heart may consume all of the fires of consciousness until there is no more thought. Nevertheless, the student should pay no attention to it. There may be visions, there may be light, or there may be colors, or there may be nothing. The student should pay no attention, though these may be called the delights of heaven. If one is able to control all thought and emotion, and then enter into a sphere or state of unworldly phenomena, that only means that one has passed a certain place. It does not indicate the place of arrival. Anything which attracts or detracts keeps the seeker away from the goal. Of course, there may come a time when one is drawn into the light or drawn into the heart sphere, when one feels the line of demarcation between person and person depart, when one is conscious of space being within oneself and not without, and when one has no longer any time conception, but feels as if living in eternity. Such a one may be said to be in meditation. Such a one may be said to be at the gates of samadhi. The watching over the breath is important both in meditation and out of it. By guarding the breath, one learns to control the ego, and from a practical view, one develops efficiency in action. For this purpose, there are many esoteric exercises which are given the disciple by the teacher at various stages of the student's development, also according to the student's particular need. In meditation, one should observe the rhythm of the breath until one is able to get the mind quiet. So, this rhythm of the breath is two different levels. One level, the obvious one, is the tempo of squishing gas in and out. But he's also talking about the subtle level of the breath, the life force moving through us, and how fine or how coarse that energy is, whether it's relatively smooth or chaotic. And this is a whole inquiry. Most of us are habituated to chaotic rhythms of our breath, which means of our life force. And it takes some doing to begin to discern and begin to cultivate a very fine and stable, even, regular pendulation of our life force, which is also to say of our consciousness. So one could use the New Age term vibration in this regard. In meditation, one should observe the rhythm of the breath until one is able to get the mind quiet. So a regulated nervous system, a refined breath, and a quiet mind are really of a piece. If the mind cannot be quieted, one may just watch the rhythm of the breath continually. So not just watching, observing, feeling really the tempo of the breath of the body, but also observing the fineness or coarseness, the evenness or jankiness of our life force. Even just realizing that our life force has become janky goes a long ways in helping to bring it into better regulation, more refinement, and a more even and harmonious movement. Yet one may also purify the breath as by Darud. So in this sense, he's using the word Darud. This pretty much the same way that we use the word fikr, which we talked about last week, as putting a sacred phrase into the rhythm of the inhale and the exhale silently. Then one will find that it is difficult to watch, and indeed there is no need to observe breath when one enters the real silence. So this practice, which as I said is properly a retreat practice, and there's reasons that one does not do this in daily life, of thinking the words La ilaha on the out-breath, is that it tends to make us, by degrees, empty. It tends to take some of the rough edges off of the ego and the thoughts that the ego creates. The problem with doing it as a daily practice is that things put on the bottom of the exhale, especially if there's a hold at the bottom of the exhalation, is that can leave us open to impressions floating about the collective that are not necessarily wholesome or good for us to ingest. And as we become more empty, we also have to become more discriminating, because we also become more vulnerable. As one enters the real silence, one begins to receive the energy of space, which is the energy of life. Nevertheless, the student should pay no attention to it. Sometimes one will become sensitive to light, and after a while, this light may increase more and more until one's whole inner being may become radiant with light. Nevertheless, one should pay no attention to it. The heart may pound, the heart may beat, the heart may consume all the fires of consciousness until there is no more thought. Nevertheless, the seeker should pay no attention to it. There may be visions, or there may be light, or there may be colors, or there may be nothing. The seeker should pay no attention, though those may be called the delights of heaven. If one is able to control all thought and emotion, and then enter into a sphere or state of otherworldly phenomena, that only means that one has passed a certain place. It does not indicate the place of arrival. Most of spiritual experience is road noise. It just means there's movement. And it requires developing tremendous discriminating awareness to discern whether involving oneself in a particular experience is going to be growth producing, or whether it's merely a signpost for the spiritual tourist trap up the street a ways. And this becomes subtler and more nuanced, and the traps become more and more profound as one goes along. And sometimes these experiences, especially of light and of actual ecstasy, not just euphoria, and those are completely different things. These experiences can become profound. They can become life-changing. They can become shattering and deeply healing. But they aren't the goal. So nevertheless, one should pay no attention to it. And there's even a grieving at some of the further stages, because to become even more deeply authentic, we have to let go of what at one time was a breakthrough. And this is sometimes not easy. You have to want to be authentically free rather than dress up your cage. Having said that, as we noted in the various visits to the Magic Tavern discourse, the tavern is there, the wines are there. Know what sobriety is, and then drink the wine that you choose consciously. So, one more time. The Sufi path is not rules. Or, if you wish, we're Sufis, we're not supposed to anything. Of course, there may come a time when one is drawn into the light or drawn into the heart sphere, when one feels that line of demarcation between person and person depart, when one is conscious of space being within oneself and not without, and when one has no longer any time conception, but feels as if living in eternity. Such a one may be said to be in meditation. Such a one may be said to be at the gates of samadhi. So it's a little bit of a puzzlement for me why such an advanced teaching is in the beginning discourses, but it is. There you go. I hope it's planting a seed. But this kind of thing is actually spiritual graduate school. So it is a bit paradoxical, or it seems paradoxical, that we are at once creating the conditions for a direct experience and being mindful to not get stuck in the experience, but to remain inwardly fluid and to become more empty of the different ways that the ego tries to reify experience into self-representation. Allah, la ilaha illallah. Allah, la ilaha illallah. Allah, la ilaha illallah. Allah ilaha Allah ilaha Allah la ilaha illallah. Allah ilaha illallah. Allah ilaha Allah la ilaha Allah Inhale. Inhale. Keep the melody going in your head as you breathe this. Do it in your own rhythm of breath. 11 more times, 11 more cycles. So being mindful that the atmosphere in the room is very fine. Any questions or comments?
Do you have any like practical suggestion about how not to pay attention to that stuff that he was saying not to pay attention to?
One of my early Sufi influences, Murshid Shamshir, the way he put it was, smile at the flowers, appreciate them, but don't pick them.
Like it.
Yeah. On one hand, these experiences are part of a fully lived human life. So there's not really any, in spite of the discourse, there's no shoulds about this. Just be aware, make intelligent, wise choices, understand the consequences. And like they say, good judgment comes from experience, experience comes from bad judgment. And there's certain mistakes that we all make that are absolutely predictable from our teachers' perspectives. And we still have to make those mistakes because that's how we learn. And these experiences are part of a fully lived human life. So we don't ignore them. I mean, this isn't Sufi Lutheran, you know. I mean, there are some sheikhs and some particular orders that are more austere in this way than some others. Sometimes that's just that teacher's particular predilection. Sometimes it's got to do with the kind of the students that he or she has and their tendency to get waylaid in experiences. And it's one of the reasons that we don't talk about these experiences except with our guides.
Why?
A couple of reasons. Okay, so there's two technical terms here, hal and maqam. Hal is a state. So when an Arab asks how you're doing, they'll say, how's your state? How's your hal? In reference to this path, a hal is a transitory condition.
Mm-hmm.
It can be brought on by practice, like we just did. It can be spontaneous. It can be a drug experience. All of those are possible. All of those are legit in their way, but they are transitory. And with regard to the awhal, which is plural, that are brought on either spontaneously by just grace or by practice, like on retreat or in your daily practices, it can last a moment, a few seconds maybe, or it can last literally for weeks with, a certain susceptibility that comes and goes, but it's always kind of there. And these come, they do their work, and they go according to a particular wisdom that is basically beyond human understanding. And if we try to hang on to them, they tend to become just more ornaments for our ego. If we talk about them, it's two things that happens. One is that they do become ornaments to the ego, and the other is that the energy that is needed for the hull to do its work gets pissed away. And the egoic part, I mean, the best you can hope for, besides having a nice Sufi merit badge, is that it will tend to induce envy in the listener. This is not a service to them or to yourself. And no matter how careful we are, there's always a little bit of embellishment to make it more entertaining or whatevs. So there are certain experiences that I've had that I talk about because they're instructive, and they've also done their work. So I'm not in, and I've also done what I can to not let my ego get too wrapped around the axle. And I'm careful about who I speak about those experiences with. They're not, coffee cup conversations. And the real experiences are actually beyond description. You just kind of go, there's a sort of deer in the headlights feeling about it. And the other thing about the egoic piece is that someone who actually knows what's going on, if will know immediately whether you're speaking from actual experience or something you made up. So there's three kinds of experiences. There's real experiences. There's counterfeit experiences, which are emotion and imagination and, some artifacts of other things. And there's real experiences, which are just not growth producing. So a lot of the spiritual art that one finds are, people's third eye experiences, but they don't they don't produce any change. It's just, it's just the scenery. It's not the actual journey. Some of it is very beautiful. And it doesn't, real experiences force us to reorder our lives in accordance with the thing that we suddenly can't unsee. It changes us in some way.
I have a question about the arrival.
The arrival.
You said that it's not the arrival.
The experiences are not the arrival.
Yeah.
I called it road noise.
Yes. So, is there any goal at all? Like, when say the goal said closer to Allah,
Yeah.
but is that even
is that even a thing?
right? Because we're not really far.
Well, the reality is that we are neither close nor far from Allah. Actually, the reality is that even saying that Allah is closer to us than
our jugular
than our breath, is still the finger pointing at the moon. There's the moon. Not my hand, that's the moon. This thing is not.
Okay.
So, is there a goal? Yes, but also no.
What's the goal?
If there is one, it's deeper and deeper levels of intimacy with one's own deep substance. That deep substance at the bottom of the rabbit hole is Allah. And what that is cannot be spoken. It can't even be thought about meaningfully. As it says in Surah Ikhlas, God isn't like anything you can think about. We still think about it because that's what minds do. And there is a kind of successive approximation as our experience becomes more authentic, as we become more authentic, as we exfoliate ourselves of more and more of our cultural and family and personal bullshit. And there is a certain level of authenticity at which that which is most authentic about us awakens to itself. And there is this profound figure ground shift, if you know what that is. Okay. Do you know that figure, which you can see either as a vase or two profiles facing each other? Okay, so sometimes the vase is background and you see the profiles. Sometimes the profiles are background and you see the vase. So consciousness, as it moves us, as it illuminates and is the ground of our own individual consciousness. Figure is who we take ourselves to be. Our personal identity. There are moments, as he talked about at the very end of this discourse, once you've gone through all of the, sifted through all the nonsense and all of the experience, real or unreal, useful or not useful, that fundamental consciousness awakens to itself, in us, through us, as us. The personal identity is decentralized as the pivot of our experience. And our felt identity becomes vast because it's all consciousness. And if there's a goal, that's it. It's also true that once graced with that experience, because it's uncaused, you can't make it happen. You can just get better at getting out of your own way until there's this unguarded moment of yes. And that which is always thoroughly pervaded us down to the quantum level wakes up in our location. And then there's this knowledge that there was never any goal. So, no. I have a gift for putting really difficult shit into pretty accessible language. Don't get caught in it. Don't make rules about it.
Yeah.
Don't create structure around it, even though I know you're going to.
I feel like just the conditioning of like growing up like in a like capitalist society where it's like,
yeah,
you're supposed to make something of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then me being particularly shit at making something of myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like really easy to like come onto like a spiritual path and get like really attached to like being good at it, because it's the only thing I've ever been good at. Yeah. So yeah, but then it's just like no goal. Like there has to be a goal. And then there's the awareness of like that what's happening here is like just what's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, what I can say about that is that I suck at life too, at least per the consensus reality. I mean, honest to God, I don't know how I managed 8 years at Microsoft. Yeah.
I don't know how I managed 22 years of being alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I was actually pretty well respected as a support engineer. I mean, I had over 200 articles in the knowledge base, and it's like people, email or in and out of my cubicle going, what's this thing? But I think I mentioned before, one of the reasons I do this teaching is that it's something that I actually can do. And at least I think I'm pretty good at it. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how many of my students, wake up in my lifetime. That's the acid test. Um, it's okay to set a goal, because that's what minds do.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a subtle structure in this path. There is a curriculum of sorts. There are certain milestones. There are actual breakover points where there is a deep shift in the way consciousness itself works. And there's those things that we suddenly can't unsee and have to like usually scramble to reorder our lives to accommodate them. There was one for me when I had regarded our egos and all of its stuff and all of the armoring that we carry as the enemy. And I was going to break it all apart. And there was this moment. I was riding a bus. And I'd been doing a lot of practice that morning and had some business downtown. And I got on the bus. And everybody on the bus just looked, you. So I found myself a seat by myself, and every person, right? And every person getting on the bus looked worse than the last. And and just the array of human shticks getting on the bus was just like blowing my mind. And and I started seeing through the into what was actually driving some of these people. And like, here's somebody who makes his living as a thief, and here's somebody who's eaten up with guilt about their whole life, in a really oppressive childhood atmosphere where everything was judged. And it's just like fucking went on and on. And I get off the bus and I'm walking down First Avenue into Pioneer Square. And then I'm seeing each human being as this point of brilliant light, completely unconscious, completely enmeshed in the story and all of the structure that they had created, and especially all of the ego structure that they had created to deal with the pain that is the inevitable result of not a falling out of awareness of being this being of brilliant light. And it was heartbreaking.
Mm.
And along with that was the awareness that people's egos were all they had.
Mm.
And everybody's just fucking doing their best to put one foot in front of the other. And the ego is not the enemy. And how could I do anything but have compassion for somebody just fucking trying to get by and doing the very best they could? For one person, that looks like being really high functioning in the world and having all the symbols of success. And for another person, it's staying drunk. And neither of those is particularly any better or any worse per that brilliant point of light.
Mm.
It's just different kinds of, whether you're drinking a lot of alcohol or whether you're drinking success, you're still shit-faced. And that changed me. It brought me into what, for lack of a better thing, I'm going to call objective compassion. And that's the only container that's big enough to hold the whole disaster. So there are these moments. There's also what, for lack of a better term, I'll call initiations, where these moments accumulate to a point of really radically shifting how our felt identity functions and how we perceive and what we perceive. And there's certain things that were only theoretical that, reading about them or hearing about them every week in class suddenly become as real as electricity. And understanding at a felt sense, at an interoceptive sense, how it acts upon us and what we can actually do with it. And those can't really be goals except in a really broad, sloppy kind of sense. But they are real. And every spiritual path has a particular framework, a particular view of these experiences, what their place is in the overall arc of our human spiritual development, and what the breakover points are, where we're suddenly a different person. I think a goal at just getting better at humaning is quite fine. I think that's enough.